Chapter 5. The Bloody Eye. These were proper punks. As gross, sad, dumb, and vile as they were, Jim had to acknowledge these were proper punks. In fact, it was almost like somebody found an old book on punk culture, their dress, their hairstyles, tattoos, and the body piercings from the 1980s, and then copied verbatim every last thing they saw. Their hair was spiky and mostly worn and colorfully dyed mohawks of various styles that couldn't have been easy to maintain. Their clothing was either leather or brightly colored cotton, all of which had rough yet tastefully torn holes in every part they should have. It looked like they were ready for an underground concert or night on the town. What wasn't concert ready, though, were their accessories. They had guns, knives, chains, and everything you would need for a small war. Their clothing was also stained, not only with dirt and motor oil, but more than a little blood. Some blood stains were old and faded, almost gone. At some point, somebody must have washed their clothing, but other stains were much fresher. A couple still looked wet. These people weren't just punks in the fashion sense. The occasional swastika and iron stars only helped to enforce that these people meant business. It was a bit odd, though, to see swastikas on some gang members who clearly weren't white. Maybe the educational system wasn't as good as it used to be. It was entirely possible that not a single one of them ever used a book for anything more than a substitute for toilet paper. But one of them looked much sharper than the others, and much to Jim's extreme displeasure, he was the one holding Nate by the neck. These comically stereotypical goons dragged Nate in with them and forced him to show Jim's hiding spot. Also stereotypically, Jim begged them to let Nate go, but his pleas only elicited laughter and mocking from the group of hooligans. "So, Bucket Geezer, what's life like in that fish tank?" said the intelligent-looking goon who was clearly in charge of the misbegotten pack of thugs. A minute earlier, one of the thugs, a very tall, buff black guy with spiked green hair and a swastika t-shirt, grabbed Jim's encasement off the shelf Nate hit him on and slammed it down on an old, stained wooden coffee table in front of a faded brown couch. Jim had only seen the couch the couple of times Nate had worked closely on his case. There was a lot of the warehouse Jim hadn't seen, but when you live in a glorified fishbowl, it's hard to be well-traveled. Maybe it was the jarring impact with the table, but for a moment Jim was impressed with the charisma of this gang leader. He had only mentioned fish tank once, and already Jim was now thinking of himself as a fish. How did this punk get into his head so fast? Their leader was a tan, freckled white kid with spiked hair that was dyed blood red. He couldn't have been more than 20, but his scars suggested he was far more mature for his age. His jacket was tastefully studded with spikes, one of which was missing, and showed more than a few scars of its own. The white wife-beater he wore under it was so tattered it barely counted as a shirt. There was something about the kid that Jim couldn't quite put his finger on, but he looked very familiar. And right beside him, nestled in the crook of the gang leader's arm, uncomfortably close to a full-on chokehold, was poor little Nate. All around the couch clustered the other goons. They weren't nearly as comfortable looking as their leader, who had sprawled out on Nate's couch like he owned the place. Instead, they were loosely gathered around the couch, staring at Jim's encasement. One of the big guys in the back, with a bald head and a spiked wooden bat, looked so confused by Jim's box that it appeared as if his last functional brain cell might be on the verge of bursting. It wasn't too hard to tell these idiots were trying to figure out how Jim fit inside such a small box. Jim could only imagine their mental picture of a dwarf being folded up and stuffed inside of a shoebox. It was more than a little ironic that people without brains were so confused by a box that contained one. Jim looked back at them through the small video screen Nate had fixed on the side of his case. Actually, in this regard, he imagined he must look like a talking Malibu Barbie Ken doll sealed inside a box. Jim tried to get as close as he could to the virtual camera that hovered over his little sandy island. He wanted to make himself look as big as possible to these punks. Of course, their leader only found this more amusing. "Why don't you come in here and find out?" said Jim as he tried to puff himself up as much as possible. He really hoped his generic jock avatar didn't betray the out-of-his-mind fear he was currently experiencing. Jim was actually rather surprised himself for not immediately backing down and kowtowing to these monsters. Almost every part of his mind was ready to drop to his knees and start begging, but there was something about seeing them hold Nate hostage which gave him the strength to push forward. Nate had a bloody nose and a black eye. Jim could tell Nate hadn't given him up easily. "Why don't you come out here, old man?" said the punk leader as he gave Jim's case a little kick with his steel-toed boots. His menacing grin never stopped once. The man's predatory eyes could have given Charlie the Shark a run for his money. Jim's case tilted back for a moment, then slammed back down. While Jim couldn't feel the blow itself, an instant wooziness informed him of the reality of the impact. Jim stumbled back from the floating camera inside his virtual world. It was killing him not only how helpless he was, but how clearly helpless he instantly appeared to the pack of thugs gathered around his case. Between the kick and Jim's dizziness, the room erupted in vicious laughter at Jim's failed attempt to look tough. After a few seconds, the punk leader raised his hand and said, "Hey!" Instantly, the vicious pack of street rats fell silent like obedient dogs. He clearly owned these mongrels, body and soul. It was quite impressive, but mostly it just reminded Jim how much he wished he had physical arms to strangle his scumbag with. "You have some property that belongs to me. I'm thinking if I pry that withered old brain out of that case, I could sell it for a few bucks to a junk dealer. Also, your little friend borrowed the VR machine I like to relax in. You're standing on my island, old man." Jim looked down at his body. That's why the punk leader looked familiar. The tight, muscular body, the freckles, the tacky sense of fashion. Jim was using the punk leader's avatar. Jim hadn't had a very good look at his current face, but he was certain he felt a scar across the left eye, in the exact same spot as the cocky young man staring back at him. Maybe half the confusion of the punks was simply due to them looking at their leader on a view screen, in a tacky Hawaiian shirt, staring back at himself. Jim struggled to think of something that would save his life and Nate. What could he possibly do in this fishbowl? Yet again thinking of himself as a fish. Damn that punk. What skills did Jim have? He wasn't an engineer or artist. He didn't even have a body. There was only one thing he was ever really good at. Fortunately, this was something you didn't need a body to handle. "I'm more valuable to you in this case than out. I can do something for you none of your other gang members can," said Jim as he struggled to regain his composure after the kick. Jim had an idea. It was a weak idea. It was a crazy gamble. But if all you got is a pear and 2 chips, you gotta bet high. "Oh, really?" said the punk leader, with an even more toothy and shark-like grin than before. "What could you possibly do in there that would even be the slightest use to me?" "I can be your accountant," said Jim, with as much confidence as he could muster. This caused the entire room to explode in laughter. Jim imagined these dirtbags hadn't laughed so hard since the last time they farted on someone's face. It was clearly the funniest thing they'd ever heard. Really, it sort of was. What a terrible gamble. Jim couldn't help but to droop slightly from his attempt at a heroic posture. The thugs were in tears. Even the punk's leader, whose composure seemed locked at somewhat close to a hungry cannibal, started to chuckle a bit. The only ones not laughing were Jim and Nate. Nate gawked at Jim in disbelief and more than a little anger. Clearly Nate was hoping the only friendly adult he knew could come up with something better to save them. Whatever Nate thought Jim was going to come up with, offering to be the gang's accountant wasn't it. The gang leader raised his hand again, and almost all of the thugs immediately stopped laughing. Just one remained laughing, the one with the baseball bat. But the tall black one with the green mohawk reached over and slapped him on the back of his bald head. Immediately, the big galoot shut up and snapped to attention just like the rest. "And what the makes you think I need an accountant? You gonna help me with my 401k?" mocked their leader. He smiled and chuckled, but the other thugs didn't join in. Apparently not a single one knew what a 401k was. Jim was actually impressed the leader did, considering how dense these punks appeared to be. Their leader turned his head ever so slightly and looked back at his gang of idiots with a look that could have cut a diamond in half. Immediately, their confusion was replaced with forced laughter and looks of nervousness. The leader let this sad laughter continue for a few seconds before raising his hand again, immediately inducing complete silence in the group. By all rights, Jim should have been scrambling for some other angle, but instead he was now completely committed to his dumb plan. All chips in. "You're a smart guy," started Jim. "You want to get the most out of your money, right?" Jim's face felt hot with nervousness, but fortunately his Ken doll simulated body was incapable of sweating. If his virtual body could have sweated, he'd have been drenched. "Okay, go on," said the leader, who seemed a little more dimly interested in the offer. "I can help you get the most out of your income. I used to help a lot of rich people get richer," started Jim, but at this point he was cut off by yet another boot to the face by the punk's leader. Jim staggered from the blow. "Don't," started Nate, but he was silenced again by a quick thump to the head by the punk's leader. "Money isn't a thing now, old man. There's no market for you to game. I'm not paying any taxes. You'll have to do better than that," said the leader. Jim felt a wave of dizziness pass through him again. He was really quite fragile in this case. Another one of those and he might be comatose inside his fish tank. Again with a fish. "Even without money, you still need to obtain things and sell them for what they're worth. I can get you more. I can get you what they're worth. And," started Jim as he struggled to assemble a sentence, "I can also help you find out if somebody is stealing from you." "Oh, really?" said the leader, who was now honestly interested in what Jim was saying. Jim had him hooked. This wasn't the first time he dealt with shady characters. While Jim never went looking for dirty money, being good at his job, those people came looking for him. Criminals love to throw around money like water, and while they always like to make even more money, what always really piqued their interest was finding out who might be stealing from them. Even if the amount was very small, maybe $100 out of a million, that knowledge was priceless. As a number cruncher, Jim had no issue smoking out even the smallest embezzlers. It didn't help Jim sleep at night, though, knowing that some of these penny-ante crooks might have come to grisly ends due to his sleuthing. Whenever Jim was in one of those unfortunate situations, he always had to be careful weaseling his way out of it. He had no love working for scumbags. Actually, this was the first time he ever went out of his way to work for one. "All right, little fish, I'll give you a chance," replied their leader. Nate breathed a sigh of relief. Jim knew it was too soon. He wanted to reach out of his virtual world and silence Nate, but it was too late. The leader looked down at Nate and said, "But as for this one, he stole from me. I can't let that go," said the leader. And with that he pulled out a rather large knife. "Please wait," said Jim. "I need him to stay alive. He's really gifted. He could be useful to you." The gang leader didn't look at Jim, though, but instead focused on Nate with a big toothy smile. "I figured you might be a package deal, and you're right. He could be really useful to my organization," said the leader as he grabbed Nate's hand and forced it down on the table. Nate struggled to pull free and run, but a few of the other gang members grabbed the boy and held him down. It seemed like they knew what their leader was going to do next. But you don't join the Bloody Eye for free. There's got to be a price. With this, the other gang members collectively let out a menacing chuckle. The tall black one leaned in and held Nate's hand down as their leader lined the blade up with Nate's pinky finger. It was at that moment Jim noticed the tall man didn't have the end of his pinky finger. Jim's eyes darted around the view screen in his virtual room, and through the high-resolution image, he noticed that none of the punk's right hands had a full pinky finger. Each one was missing a tip, if not the whole finger. "Since you stole from me, I think we're going to have to take a little more than normal," said the leader. He positioned the knife's blade right next to the knuckle of Nate's little finger on his right hand. The blade was so sharp, a little bit of blood welled up from just resting on top. Nate struggled madly to get away, but the giggling gang wouldn't let him flee. The sheer look of enjoyment on their faces made Jim wish he could flay them all alive like fish. "Please don't do this. He's just a kid," begged Jim. "And now he's going to be one of us," said their leader. Their leader looked up at the camera on Jim's case and right through Jim's soul. The look chilled him right to his non-existent bones. The leader held the knife to the back of the finger with one hand and raised his palm high over the unsharpened back of the blade with the other. "Just be thankful you don't have any fingers," said the leader with a grin, and with that he brought his hand down on the back of the blade with one solid blow. The piercing sound of Nate's scream was almost drowned out by the cheer of the gang's other members. Almost.